Welcome. Welcome. My name is Lindsey T.H. Jackson, and I am our Unlearning host. And today we are going to be unlearning business as usual, which is, I know exactly what we all need to talk about at the beginning of this year, as we're already going through our emails, rolling back into the office, physical or virtual, and already wondering, when is Martin Luther King Jr. Day? Is that this Monday? I already need a break. Yeah. Although at LTHJ Global, we did take our annual 3 weeks off. So I'm feeling good. Producer Laura Kay, how you feeling?
Basically just the drool face emoji. Just, yeah. So good.
This is Lindsey. As you get in your comfy seats, kick off your shoes, relax your feet, party on down to the, you know the song. Just a reminder that there is a live transcript available. So if you press that little CC button down at the bottom, you can enable a live transcript and captions as we go through our time together. We have the wonderful live ASL interpretation from Pro Bono ASL. Again, reminder that we are practicing making this a more inclusive space and stretching our muscles. So you will hear us when we go to speak, say, "This is Lindsey," and then speak. And you'll get used to it. It's just a part of the beautiful rhythm of inclusive communication. If you haven't read our community guidelines, please take a moment to do so now, especially if this is your first time joining us. This is not a community where we come and we are trying to find out who's the best ally, who's the best accomplice, who's the person that we're going to cancel first. Not that space. If you want to find that, is that Twitter nowadays? I don't know. We're not there. So read the community guidelines, because some of us have not been in spaces where it is about creating community, not about creating exclusion in a long time. And this is the latter. We're going to be recording, which means that when you are talking, you will be on the recording. Mostly that's just going to be myself and the wonderful panel ASL interpreters that we have here today. But if at the end you are invited up to ask a question, you will be on that recording. So please just come as you are. Don't fix your makeup, don't fix your hair, don't whatever. Well, Joshua Caldwell, today we already talked about it. I was like, what? You shaved your beard? Not for this group. But just letting you know that that is happening. If you haven't already, I want you to write this down now. Pro Bono ASL, making the revolution accessible. They have been wonderful partners to us in our live interpretation. And it is such a wonderful aspect of building community, of expanding access within your organizations. So take this down and make sure that when you are thinking about how do I expand access in 2023? Aha! Pro Bono ASL, they're right for me. I just made that commercial up right then. I should be in a different business. What do we do at LTHJ Global? Turns out I don't make commercial jingles. What we do is DEI consulting for medium to large and enterprise scale organizations. And we work with organizations on executive coaching, DEI implementation, strategic planning and design, all the inclusive building systems fun. If you haven't already, grab some time with me or one of our consultants to talk about your 2023 DEI plan. Please follow the link in this slide deck, and maybe Laura Kay will send it out in the follow-up email. And let's get your 2023 strategy mapped out. Also, today, officially, we just onboarded our first cohort member to Sojourn, which is for companies of 150 people and smaller. So if you haven't already logged on to Sojourn DEI to check out how we are using technology to mediate the relationship between DEI consultancy and small and mid-sized businesses, check it out. And maybe get on the list to be in cohort 2 or cohort 3. So what's up today? Today, we're going to hold space together as always. We're going to have a guided panel discussion. This panel is fire. Okay, stop singing. Laura said to me, Lindsey, please sing less in 2023. No, she didn't.
This is Laura. I would like to deny that statement on the record.
That was just a personal, it was in there. At the top of the hour, as always, we're going to excuse those who have to return to Western constructs of time to get to their next meeting, but we will stay on and let the discussion flow if needed. And we encourage you to sign up for all future unlearnings. Let's start the way we want to end. Let's take a moment and take a deep breath together. And exhale. Let's do one more because it's January. Deep inhale together. And exhale. Jess Okezi is the Associate Director of People and Culture at the American Political Science Association. Jess is a creative, enthusiastic, results-oriented, and empathetic human resource professional, currently serving as the Associate Director of People and Culture at the American Political Science Association. I just want everybody to name that little thing that popped up in your mind when you read HR leader and empathetic and enthusiastic and creativity. Notice that judgment, how we have stopped associating human resources with all of those aspects of the human condition, which is why we have Jess here today. Jess has worked in 3 different countries across 6 industries as both a solo HR department and leader of a team. And Jess is really passionate about debunking some of the myths about human resources and people and culture teams. Jess, when thinking about disrupting business as usual, why might we start with addressing how we think about human capital within organizations, how we think about building people, operations, systems, and teams? Why is human resources such an important aspect of disrupting the status quo?
This is Jess. Thanks, Lindsey. I would say because there's no business and there's no organization without humans, right? Like you can't bring in computers and electronics and stones to do the work. People do the work. And I feel like for so long, HR was like relegated to tactical work, or you come in and you're the one that just keeps people's records and you basically fire people and hire people. A lot of people that I meet in my day to day, when I say I'm in HR, they're like, oh, so you're the one that hires and fires people. And that's not what I would like to be known for. That's not what a lot of people that are in my network would like to be known for as HR and people leaders. So going back to the question, I think really, again, just the support for the people, because again, people are the ones that drive your business and your organization.
Yeah. Just, I mean, this is really big, and I want everybody to write this down because Jess just said something really important that might be really revolutionary for some of us, that organizations are actually made up of people. End of sentence, full stop, right? Because in a lot of organizations you go into, we walk in and somehow we think we're supposed to leave our humanity at the door. Like, oh, I have now entered the business me, and now all of my feelings just disappeared like fairies and unicorns. How just are we approaching that differently if we want to do business differently?
Oh my goodness, that's a whole another conversation for another day, right?
This conversation, but, do it.
This is Jess, by the way. But I think that the one, I shudder to use the word good thing that has come up in the last couple of years with the pandemic and the social injustices and all the other things that have come up. I think the one thing that has come up is that organizations need to change, right? And we need to take a different approach as to how we do things. With the inception of remote work, or I guess the increase of remote and hybrid work, people are no longer in these little boxes where you can see them and track in some ways their day-to-day and what it is that they're doing. And also people are in spaces where they consider, and a lot of times, homes where they live, where they eat, where they wake up, go to bed, have their day-to-day conversations with their families and friends. So the lines have really blurred as it relates to this is work me and this is me, right? The lines have blurred in some ways as it relates to this is LinkedIn and this is Instagram. These are the things you post on here and these are some things you don't post on here. So I think really business leaders really opening their eyes to, again, those blurred lines and how can we support the person as a whole human? How can we help people be their best self and do their best work? And I use those words so much that in a lot of ways, I feel like it sounds corny or it sounds just like a buzzword or like something you say, but I really truly do mean that. That's the best way that I guess I can explain it and express it.
Yes, this is Lindsey. I think it's not corny at all. And Jess, I wonder if you experience this too. One of the reasons so many leaders struggle with that is that they do not actually treat themselves as whole humans. And so the idea of treating another like that when they're constantly denying their own feelings, denying their own human capacity, their fatigue, their burnout, hard to give it back to somebody else. Yeah, we're going to keep exploring this. Let us meet Minal Bopaya. Minal is the founder and principal consultant of Brevity and Wit. Minal is an award-winning author and strategic consultant with nearly 20 years of professional experience. Her areas of expertise include human-centered design, behavior change psychology, and the principles of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. We sometimes use the acronym IDEA as they relate to media, marketing, and communications. As the founder and principal consultant of Brevity and Wit, Minal is passionate about designing for equity. Her work includes working with NPR's news managers to design a system for diversifying news sources. Welcome, Minal. Welcome.
Thank you. This is Minal. Thank you so much, Lindsey.
Minal, as we think about, and I think starting with media is such a great place to really kick off this discussion around business as usual, because I think if I, I'm sitting down, I'm watching the news, I'm, reading the newspaper, I kind of find myself in despair. Like there's nothing, it's just lost, right? Like we can't go back from the impacts of how we use media, how we use news, how we spread disinformation. How have you been able to reimagine business differently or disrupt business as usual in that space?
Yeah, thank you. So this is Minal. Thank you so much for that question, Lindsey. One, I would say that I do a lot of work with public media, and this is an unsolicited plug for public media, but I would highly recommend watching public media for your news as opposed to other more partisan sources. And I would also recommend investing in public media because there is research that shows that societies, countries, nations with taxpayer-funded public media have less polarization. So there is actually a tremendous role for media to play in creating an inclusive and equitable society, in being more representative of our diversity, in creating media that's accessible to all. And I learned that actually early in my career when I worked at Sesame Workshop, which is the nonprofit behind Sesame Street and its international co-productions. I worked in the International Research, Education, and Outreach Department, where they were using social science to address societal issues in other countries, such as in South Africa, teaching preschoolers about HIV and AIDS so that they could destigmatize playing with kids who have HIV or AIDS. Now, if we can teach preschoolers about HIV and AIDS, there's no other problem that we can't address. Like, this is not like, there is a power in media that we should harness for our goals of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. We may not be doing it all the time, or some of us, like public media, may be doing it better than others. And unfortunately, I think journalism in particular, but I think all media need to start looking not simply at their principles or best practices around journalism or storytelling or content creation, but also start measuring their impact. And that has been a lag. Often people will say, well, we shouldn't critique, like, I'm not a big fan of anti-hero narratives because I just think it models bad behavior for people most of the time. And we say, well, no, it's showing the complexity of the character, but we're not doing any social science measurement. Are people really walking away with an understanding of the complexity of the character, or are they walking away with the idea that bad behavior gets you what you want in this world? And so I think media is not going to go away, but I think like any resource or tool, we could use it much more wisely.
Wow. Minal, is it true? This is Lindsey. Was it just in the 1930s that we were able to start showing in the US the villain winning in media?
Oh, I don't know when that started. That's outside my area of expertise. There was a council. So actually, this is something I know from my husband. Comic books used to have a lot of different stories, and then there was this idea that comic books were corrupting youth, and then they created these standards. And yes, there was like this idea that they had to be superheroes and moral values needed to be conveyed. And so it may have been in the 1930s, but if you look at Shakespeare, like sometimes the villain, like, that's not like a new thing. But often they had those stories, the Shakespearean stories, I think, had more depth to them,
Yes.
So there's a difference between that and reality TV, or, our former president became president because the brain doesn't separate very well between fiction and news.
Mm.
The brain is always learning. Television is a social learning tool. In Joan Gans Cooney, who founded Sesame Workshop, she used to say, it's not if children learn from television, it's what they learned. And the same is true for adults. It's not if people are learning, it's what are they learning.
Wow. This is Lindsey. Minal, why I think this is so important and the work that you do is so important is that I imagine there's somebody on this call today or watching the recording of this later who's thinking, well, in my industry, we can't change. Business as usual is always going to be business as usual. And I hear this a lot in the law. People tell me, well, that's how law firms run. Or I hear this a lot in the medical profession. I hear this a lot in the nonprofit sector. I hear this a lot in banking. How do you, or what would you say to that person who's like, yeah, it'd be great if we could do it differently, but it probably just will never happen?
I mean, so we often joke at Brevity Wit that I'm the consultant when your question is how, not why. So I don't spend a lot of time with the people who are like, why should I do this? I was like, if you don't want to do this, that's fine. You're going to like, extinct yourself. I don't need to like hang out or like trying to convince you. However, that being said, I remember when I started Brevity Wit, like somebody came up to me and, said like, well, you'll never end racism. And I was like, well, that's like saying that we shouldn't try to make airplanes safer because you'll never get 100% safety. Like, yeah, we're not, I don't think we should go like, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good, right? Like we can make progress, and that in itself is worthy, and all of human history is about progress and us building upon what our ancestors did, right? And so that argument doesn't hold for me, that this is the way it is, so this is the way that it must be. And more to the point, the way that systems of oppression stay in place and become entrenched is by making themselves invisible. If you can't see the system, then one, you can't change it, but two, you believe that this is the natural order of things. And it's not. everything in our society, including the systems that we operate in, were designed by people who had the power to do so. And so just as they were designed for inequity, they can be designed for equity. It takes a monumental shift in mindset, first to even be able to see the system, then to be able to articulate what the system is to others, and then thirdly, to be able to change it. So it is not easy work, but it is absolutely, in my mind, work that is worthy of effort.
Yes, yes. I mean, this is Lindsey. Even if I just bring that down for a second, I want everybody to imagine when, like, you have really bad sex, but then, and you thought that was the norm, but then you had really good sex and you were like, oh my gosh, I couldn't see. I'm just making sure everybody's awake. Let us welcome Joshua Caldwell, founder and executive director. Okay, we'll do another lesson on good sex, bad sex. Founder and executive together of Rise Together Foundation and True Media. Josh Caldwell is a self-described ADHD brain working to design systems and economies to address inequitable systems by utilizing various tools of capitalism to simultaneously undo and redress its oppression. Joshua, let's start right there. What does that mean? How are we, and what?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, how are we, because you know, my binary thinking mind wants to go, capitalism bad, can't ever touch it, stop saying words. But then how are we using it simultaneously? Make it make sense, Joshua.
This is Joshua. Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, if we can presume that capitalism is oppressive by design in nature, right? If we already start with just that as a de facto fact for sake of argument, what we start to need to understand is, where can we operate within that system, whether that be in your daily lives, your home life, whether that be in your current job or the business you own? How can you shift certain things within your sphere of influence to start redressing those things, but not necessarily enforcing them?
Can you give us an example? This is Lindsey. Can you give us an example, please?
Sure. So when we were designing some of our programs, we have a program called Nucleus, where the idea is we start to fund community-owned co-ops that fill communal gaps of equity in a community, right? So the thought after that became, all right, let's say we fund our first Nucleus center and we're filling XYZ gap, whether that be a food desert, childcare, anything that prohibits that community from participating equitably. What happens if that community co-op sees a homeless person outside? Do they call the police? Right. So that's kind of the framework we're starting with, where, okay, if we're building up something with equity, where can we identify where we might still enforce oppression and then create systems to redress that?
Wow. Wow. Let's welcome everybody up to the panel here. So using that same model or that same thinking that Joshua has opened for us, Jess, how might we, within our current system, we go back to work later today, how might we, within that system, then use that system to redress how we think about humans, how we think about people operations, how we think about the systems of human resources or the DEI function within our organization?
So there are obviously a lot of different ways to do that. I speak with and coach a lot of people leaders, and they, I would say, are my first go-to, and a lot of HR people's first go-to, because they have such an influence, right? Like there's only so much that I can do as HR from a distance. At the end of the day, the people managers are the ones that are working with people and seeing people on a day-to-day basis. So with the people leaders, a lot of what I try to do in my coaching and development conversations is, first of all, things like unconscious bias, things like making assumptions about people. that is something that obviously we need to unlearn as a society, or we need to try to unlearn. I think the studies show that the brain tries to make these assumptions just in a way to either protect itself or make sense of what's going on around you in the world. But how can we see our bias and pinpoint it for what it is and make better decisions, right? So that is one of the ways that I would say. And even as an individual contributor, I would say that it's very important that we also look at ourselves and how we show up in our organization. One of the things that I say all the time to my team members is see something. If you see something, say something, right? And say something to me as your HR partner, say something to your leaders, because I can't fix what I don't know. So whenever you see something, as much as possible, be vocal, talk to someone that you trust. And that's the only way that we can start to basically fix some of these issues that have long existed in organizations.
This is Lindsey. To your point, even that would be disrupting business as usual, right? Going back to what Minal said, this idea of, well, that's just how things are. We kind of get used to in organizations, well, my manager's treating that person poorly, but it's not happening to me. So why would I say anything? Why would I bring it forward? Or we watch people get victimized within the workplace. We watch micro and macroaggressions happen across us, but we don't do anything because we just go, that's work. As opposed to saying, I see something and I'm going to say something. And if everybody started doing that, that drop in a bucket starts to finally become the tide. Manil, I remember doing an interview with someone who was talking about third generation media and how what we've started to see is how the news sources that we trust because of social media are individuals on the ground, right? People actually on the ground in Ukraine, people actually on the ground in Haiti, in the video that we saw that for many of us was the entry into this work of George Floyd's murder. How can we take that sort of third gen, that next gen thinking into our work today, tomorrow?
You mean into our work in DEI?
Into our work of DEI, as well as just disrupting the status quo, about rethinking, because of the work you do in neuroscience, psychology, how is it that you get people out of their box, thinking differently, thinking about new opportunities, new ways of existing in the world?
Yeah, I think it's really important to actually first develop a lot of self-awareness about your own strengths and be able to do a power analysis on your own power. Because I want to, I'm going to make a very sort of nuanced, and if people don't hear the nuance, it'll be controversial argument.
Do it.
And that is, let me say it this way. I often talk about there are two ways to use your power. Now, there are lots of different powers. There's historical power, there's, positional power, blah, blah, blah. But there's two main ways to use your power. There's a supremacist way of using power, which is using power to dominate, control, oppress, exploit, or extract from people or the environment or the world or society, right? Then there are liberatory uses of power. And liberatory uses of power are not threatened by difference, and they use power to connect, heal, repair our world, and empower others. Now, when you are trying to interrupt bias or advocate for change, even if that change might be diversity, equity, and inclusion, you could be engaging in supremacist uses of power.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this in organizations. What has come up really frequently recently is, and not to just call out one group, but like white allies using supremacist uses of power in their belief that they're advocating for marginalized communities. They're saying something, but they're saying it in a way that's actually modeling the wrong behavior, right? And so they need to be able to engage. Like, I just read this beautiful book called Nonviolent Communication, right? Like, they need to be able to engage for, like, how you advocate is as important as what you're advocating for. And if you don't have the emotional stamina to check yourself when your biases are triggered, then it's okay to bench yourself from a conversation or from an activity. My first job in DEI was in Cook Ross right after the 2016 election. Howard Ross, the founder, really wanted me to go work with clients. And I was like, I am too angry for you to go put me in front of a room of white people. I am sitting this out for a year before I'm going to do that, right? And you have to have that self-awareness to know not just what your power is, but how your power can go, like, can be used destructively for the wrong ends, right? And when to bench yourself. If you know when to bench yourself, then you, in my opinion, are an effective DEI practitioner. If you think you're the solution to every problem, then you're still part of the problem.
Ooh, this is Lindsey. Oof. Go ahead and write that down. If you think you're the solution to every problem, you is the problem, girl. We'll be passing out tattoos later with that on it. I want to throw Joshua in there to expand on that. Joshua, can you pick up on where Manal is taking us? How else can we start to, one, that self-reflective, that deep personal practice of constantly interrogating ourselves? And then as we move to the we work within the systemic change, how do you approach that work? How do you encourage and inspire leaders to start to both work within the systems that they have to create change, but then also imagine possibilities outside of the system that might be new and different and better?
So first, I have to mention to Manal's point when she mentioned the anti-hero, is the first thing I wrote down was I think I did a piece a couple of days ago where I was talking about how the anti-hero feels like the natural transition from like the white heroes narrative as we rectify whiteness in media, right? Where we're like starting to excuse the bad actions and bad actors because we all know that we suffer under these oppressive dichotomies, right? And it's just that like I don't suffer more because of my skin and a bunch of other factors. So the functionality that exists there is fascinating to me. This was just a side piece. I love the media aspect, so super excited to meet you. Very professional, as you can tell. To your point, I would say like, and I hate the concept of this phrase generally, this whole like getting uncomfortable with discomfort or whatever that is, comfortable with discomfort. If you are close in your proximity to whiteness, racialized or otherwise, the hardest part of getting to where you want to address the system is understanding how you enforce it, right? And it's not necessarily like by the video that you're referring to was I was doing I never owned slaves, so I'm not racist, white guy video. But I also did a series of videos that address like white allies. Because there is a very real progression that happens as you start to understand how you enforce oppression via your proximity to whiteness. So it's starting to get uncomfortable with like just feelings, right? Because whiteness, and my friend Tammy, I'm going to give a shout out to Tammy Triolo. She does a lot of workshops around developing empathy in white people. Right? Because it's just not something that was ever taught via the structures we were raised within. So part of the problem as we reinforce supremacy is just a lack of understanding emotion and empathy, right? Because we never had that for the most part within our family dichotomy.
Yes, yes, yes. Wow, you three. This is Lindsey. Anyone opening the floor, there's somebody here today who, of all the things that they could have been doing this, January 11th, 2023 at 1:40 p.m., they were like, I need to go to this talk to hear something, because I'm feeling so frustrated and I'm feeling a lot of despair, and I'm feeling like I just took some time off at the end of the year and I'm coming back and we're just in the same shit show. This is your first time here. We do swear sometimes, because when we talk about anti-racism, it is very hard not to swear. Public PSA announcement. And it's just the same shit show. And yet they still they have this fire in them that they want to get something started. What would you tell them to start? Joshua?
Well, if I can just specifically address those racialized as white with this question, is like, take a beat, right? What you're feeling right there can very quickly lead into like white urgency, can very quickly lead into other things that, again, as Manal was referring to earlier, enforce that supremacy dichotomy. So for those racialized white out there that want to be involved in this type of work, first things first, like, take a beat, right? Figure out how you enforce that dichotomy, and then figure out how you can speak to it without continuing to enforce it. And that's going to be a lot of trial and error, right? So the other thing I'll say is, don't be afraid to mess up. That's whiteness. Whiteness kind of trains you in perfectionism. You're gonna fuck up, right? Especially if you're racialized white. We are bombarded by messages that enforce that and codify that. You are gonna mess up. So it's about learning to be introspective when you do mess up, and learning how to move forward and continue to do the work. Because I was speaking with a colleague the other day, and he put it a way that I think kind of succinctly puts it towards white people is, he said, I want to thank you for like kind of doing what you do. And I know it's weird thanking a white dude, but like, you don't need me, right? You don't need me in your life, right? You can live your life. Whereas like, we need people like you to speak up, or else things will never change, right? So it's with that attitude I kind of try to go into it.
Yes, Manal.
Yeah, this is Minal. Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, everyone should take a beat, because the world doesn't change by people trying to change it. The world changes by people who are lit from within. And so, I wrote a book on equity, and equity is all about fairness. But in that book, I even said that it's a somewhat ironic proposition, because I am the first person to admit that life is inherently unfair. Even if we solved all the man-made unfairness, there would still be people who get terminal illnesses that are incurable. There are people who die unexpectedly, or more or less tragically, the person you love doesn't love you back. Like, that is there in life. And you can't go advocating to right all the world's wrongs, because like suffering is baked into this whole human experience, right? And what I often advise people when they have that sense of like fire, I want them to use that to light themselves up, right? Not to burn the world down. And I understand the desire to burn the world down. I've been there. I get it. Like, it's a valid like emotion. I'm not saying it's invalid, but I don't think it's particularly productive, And what I often sometimes counsel people, particularly white people and white women, is like, let's assume your ticket to heaven is written, right? Whatever heaven you have, and even if you're an atheist, that like you're good, right? And that short of committing some heinous crime, you're in, right? You don't have to prove your goodness. Now, what are you going to do with your time on earth? Right? So like, and to that point, like, if that fire in you is a burning from trauma, this work will not heal you. You got to want to do this work because it lights you up, right? And if you don't, then go pursue other work. And there is always a way to do whatever field it is with a lens towards being more inclusive, respecting human dignity, being more equitable. There's always aspects to whatever your work may be that can include that. But don't feel like you have to advocate for this because of your goodness or because you are trying to help other people or you feel guilty, right? And that is the con of white supremacy. It convinces white people that they have to do some sort of saving rather than allowing all of us to do what lights us up, right? People of color spend their times proving their worthiness, and white people think that they have to give away their time to be good. It's a complete con on for everybody participating in it. And the only way around it is to say, I don't care, and I'm not going to waste my time with what the system is trying to convince me I should do. I'm going to actually go spend my time doing what lights me up. Toni Morrison said this too. She's like, racism is a distraction. It distracts you from what you're meant to do. You don't have to go prove that you have language or that you have art or that you have culture. Just go do the work.
Mm. Mm.
Do what you want to work on.
Yes, yes, this is Lindsey. Jess, thoughts?
This is Jess, and I've just been here taking copious notes. Thank you both so much for your insight. I think the only thing that I have to add is just the low-hanging fruit of give grace to yourself and to others as best you can, and be open to constructive feedback, right? Like, as I know for myself, sometimes when people do give me feedback about, okay, so this is what you did, or this is what way you wronged me, and against thinking about the workplace, you automatically have that defense of, oh no, that was not what I was meaning to do, or this was not my intention, or that was not my intention, and oh, that's not how it was supposed to go. But maybe if you just, to Manal and Josh's point, take a beat, think through what they're saying, and as much as possible, assume that people are trying to come from a place of constructive criticism and radical candor, and work from that angle.
This is Lindsey. I don't know, everybody listening, if you were also, I felt the lack of like a church organ at many moments that were being spoken right there. I was like, get it, Pastor. Since we've already gone to church, now I'd like to take it to like a group therapy session. So Joshua, Jess, so many things of what you have been sharing, especially as we circle around this topic. And I think a lot of people are interested. How do I do business differently? How do I approach my work life differently? This holiday season, we always take 3 weeks off at the end of the year at LTHJ Global. And I was in bed most of the time, except when I, had, taking care of my kids, cooking meals, but just really covers up, in bed, resting, rejuvenating. And I came to the realization in that, that state between asleep and awake that they call second sleep, in there, that I have reached a point in my life, in my own personal healing, where I'm no longer motivated by the need for others to see me succeed. I'm no longer motivated by the con or the notion that I will only be worthy of love based on my resume or my accolades or my presentation of my body, etc. I've, gotten to this point where I'm experiencing love. Seth's always on the call, love of my life, that is freeing, that is healing, that is nurturing. And I got to this place where I was like, so what's going to get me out of bed come the Monday that we return? Knowing that we have a bunch on, right? Okay, like we're rolling out Sojourn. The consulting business is growing, but it was no longer motivated from my trauma. what do you say to somebody? What gets you out of bed when you're motivated from a place of healing, from a place of community? No longer are you doing business because you're trying to earn your value. No longer are you doing business because you're trying to prove your power. No longer are you doing business because you're still trying to get mommy or daddy's, right? Like, how do we do business then when it's just motivated from self-love, from creativity? What would that look like?
This is Minal, and what came to mind for me is there's a great quote from Tupac Shakur where he said, "I may not change the world, but I'll inspire the person that does."
Mm.
And when I was like, when I was writing my book, I knew it was like an independent press. I wasn't known. This is not going to be a bestseller. Like I knew where it was. And I was like, the point of this work is to plant seeds for trees that I will not sit under. Right? That I think is what it means to work from a creative spirit and a sense of humility of both your smallness and your largeness in the span of human history.
Yes. Joshua, Jess, thoughts?
Yeah, this is Josh. So the way I approach it is very granular, very analytical. So I have a traditional business degree, marketing background. So when I look to try and build a more equitable system, I do things like study the tax incentives of an S corp versus an LLC, right? Because most Black business owners and most owners of color have LLCs. It's cheaper. There's less barrier to entry, right? But there's also a lot of like other stuff that we could do just in our day-to-day, like small changes. Like we know what the pay equity gaps are, right? We know what the numbers are. So we've been working on a variable payment system where everyone makes a cost of living base that's equitable. And then we adjust it to localized cost of living and historical oppression identifiers, right? So if we can start to pay someone that little gap, at least within our little microsphere, right? We're starting to do a little bit because it costs everyone on the screen right now more to be alive than it does me, literally, right? So these are like little things that you can build into your payroll system. These are things that, I mean, I go a little bit more radical in some of the things I do. I wouldn't say I'm a burn it down per se, but I do very much view the corporation as a modern form of codified plantation economics. So being able to redress that through localized kind of trickle up economics, if you will.
Yeah. This is Lindsey. Joshua, you're like, I don't burn it down, but I do some clearing every once in a while. Little pre-planned.
That's just farming.
No brush fire.
No, well, this is Minal. I love Joshua's answer though, because it shows like the specificity of the, like you can like, when I say that, like, do what lights you up, like, I'm glad that there's somebody like Josh who wants to look at LLC code, like laws. I don't, right? Like, that is not my contribution to this movement. And so when I like do what lights you up means like play to your strengths, right? Like you don't have like, I'm not going to get like, there's no way if that was my job, I would get up in the morning to do it, right? Like I just wouldn't, which doesn't mean that Josh and I aren't fighting for the same thing, but we're doing it like, that's what an equitable, diverse, inclusive movement is people are bringing their different strengths to make the whole thing stronger, that to work for everyone. And you need humanity's diversity for it to be strong and resilient, right? And so, and I just want to say that also the granular matters too, because even as a writer, like I'm writing that book with like that big idea, but then what it comes down to is like each sentence and how it's designed, right? So, and to play to your strengths means, do you like your daily activities? That's a question that often people don't ask. And I saw that when I spent a lot of time in global health, people wanted to solve HIV and AIDS in Africa. You know what's needed for that is supply chain management for condoms. Do you enjoy supply chain management? Then no, you're the wrong person to solve that problem if you don't, right? Then you are not the solution to that problem. So you should hire somebody who is, and figure out what are your strengths, and then what is the problem that needs your strengths, instead of deciding on the problem that you're going to solve and twisting yourself or trying to twist the problem to suit your strengths, right? That's what this means by doing what lights you up and playing to your strengths.
This is Lindsey. Jess, your thoughts?
Yeah, this is Jess. I think Minnow put it very well. And the only thing that I will add to what you said last is just this analogy that someone threw at me a couple of years ago about, like, if someone woke you up in the middle of the night, what would be that thing that you wouldn't, and told you to do something, what would be that thing that you wouldn't be angry to do and you would do with so much joy? Do that. So I will say that. And then as it relates to the idea of using your gifts, right? What you said earlier about having done that self-work and having that self-awareness, I think the saying goes, like, you can't give what you don't have, right? So once you have that, the additional thing that I think will just automatically come is, how can I better put out into the community? Like, how can I better support and add value to people that I meet on a day-to-day, and as bringing it back to the workplace, to my colleagues, to my friends, to my families.
This is Lindsey. Jess, thank you for saying that, because I think so often, and really echoed in what you all started with, is we try to get to the what. We want to disrupt. We want to get to business unusual, but then we ourselves are doing business the same way every day. We're still denying ourselves our humanity. We're still walking in the door thinking that we're leaving our feelings and our thoughts and our emotions somehow outside. We're still completely slogging ourselves every day, and then we're expecting our team members to not feel as though they need to respond to your 10:30 p.m. email, right? Yeah. Let's open it up for some questions from the virtual community. Okay, are there some already on deck? Or if you want to come off of mute and onto camera and ask your question aloud, just raise the hand. You go to the reactions little tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and there's an icon there that says raise your hand.
And while we wait, sorry, just for all those people who are waking up and going into, like, as a worker, know that, like, workers are much stronger than the ownership class, right? When you're going in there, if you hate your job, organize a labor movement around it. If you don't like how things are going, change the things you can, right? You guys have the power. There's more of us than there are them. It's just figuring out how to utilize that power.
This is Lindsey, Joshua. I love that you said that. Just yesterday, I was speaking to somebody, and she said she was on the all team call, 1,000, team members, and somebody said, "Oh yeah, your region doesn't really have a DEI or a social group." And she said, "Well, that's going to change next month. Ours will be the biggest cohort." Next month it was, and they were getting shout outs for the work that they had done. She was just like, "I'm going to build it, and they will come." What's that movie? Anyway,
Field of Dreams. This is
thank
Jeff. Damn it. Keep forgetting.
This is Lindsey. Thank you, Field of Dreams. Okay, any questions from our community today for Minal, Jess, or Joshua?
This is LK. I haven't seen any questions come in yet since we just prompted people, but I did see an awesome DM from D. Reed, who said that Minal's book changed their entire strategy. And I just thought that was so cool. And there is, have to find. Oh God, I keep pulling up this chat. Someone else just got your book as well, who I was messaging with. So yeah, really, really great resource. And I'll just say in the follow-up emails, I'll be providing links for everything we talked about today. So you can internet stalk Josh and Jess and Mill, like I have been for the past couple months.
This is Lindsey. If for some reason LTHJ Global doesn't work out, that is a business that we're going into. We just like internet stalk really amazing people. You heard it here first, so that makes it not illegal. Also, let's just really mess with me now. Everybody go buy their book and let's make it a bestseller. Okay, so then they'll be like, oh, I totally didn't plan that, and I wasn't planning that for my future. We'll be like, haha, too bad you. Mia says, 2 friends and I were talking yesterday about the insufficiency of leaning on your strengths in a capitalistic system.
Yeah.
If your strengths don't fit capitalism. And yeah, thank you for that call out, because we know that capitalism is kind of predicated on the idea of either you are productive or you're not, in that binary thinking, hence ableism, hence classism, hence the idea of cognitive normative, which is an idea that will go out of fashion in our lifetimes. How would you advise workers in that situation, Joshua, Jess? And I'm actually going to have Jess start first from the HR lens. How would you advise someone in that situation?
The thing that came up for me is literally #cancel hustle culture, or whatever the new phrase is that is going out there. It's difficult, right? Because outside of finding a way that strength can be utilized to, again, either better provide a service or a good, and it's one where you can then start your own business or go into entrepreneurship or whatever that route is, it's really difficult. Nothing else is coming up for me, unfortunately, as a resolution to that. But I will say that, again, the mindset behind just organization as a whole, and having to be in a space where the approach is you have to work, you have to hustle, like that's the only way you succeed in life. That's something that we do need to unlearn. I don't know what the resolution is on the other end of things.
Can I give context to the question? So I was recently diagnosed with autism, and looking back on my performance reviews, it was very much like, oh, all of my negative things are either autistic traits or autistic strengths. And so that was very interesting to me, to be like, people would say, you're good at building relationships, but you don't hold eye contact. And I was like, well, eye contact is physically painful for me. And I didn't know why all my life. So it was like, oh, you're autistic. You're really good at research and reading, but you're not very good at focusing. Well, yes, because I can get really into this topic. And so finding out, I think like you were saying, Jess, the idea of the only way to be successful being to be this way is extremely tough for me. Finding out that the majority of CEOs have some kind of psychopathic or sociopathic traits. And so I told my friends, I was like, the option shouldn't be become more like a psychopath or starve. And so I'm kind of like, what is the options for me here? Yeah. Because I won't ever be have that CEO potential, which was my performance review. You don't have CEO potential. And I was like, well, yes, because that's just not my personality in general. So
this is Jess. Thank you for sharing that. With that added context, I will say that in recent years, and even before that, there have been a lot of different roles that have been created and have been not, I guess, what you would consider the norm. Like, for example, in the people space, there's a lot of buzz around like people experience and all these and people scientists and all these other roles that wouldn't be considered your traditional roles. So I think it's good that you have started from a place of looking at what your strengths are. I think if you haven't, the next step would be looking at what excites you and what you love to do, and starting a search for companies that support that out there and jobs that support that, or jobs that you can do with the strengths that you do have, right? We all can't be the same. If not, the world would be very boring. There is a need. I have to believe there is a need for your particular strengths out there in the world. So that would be the first approach that I would take towards that.
So this is Minal. If I can just add to that, Maya, is it Maya? Am I pronouncing that right? Mia?
Maya.
Oh, Maya, okay. One, yes, thank you for sharing. Two, you're not alone. What you might be is a little bit ahead of your time. So everything that I talk about in equity, I saw my best friend like 6 months ago from college, and she's like, I'm so proud of you. You published this book. I was like, yeah, this is all shit I was talking about 20 years ago in college when I was fundamentally undateable and like people thought I was bonkers, right? Like this shit 20 years ago did not go down. And so what you, and so what I'm saying is that like, what I believed erroneously, I had a high school teacher who had said something like bloom where you're planted. That is not possible. Like orchids don't bloom in the desert. So you got to find an environment where your strengths are valued. That is your job search, right? And as well as there's this wonderful thing online called Ikigai. They say it's a Japanese thing. I don't know if it is, but I'm putting a link in the chat to an article that talks about a well-designed life is intersecting between what do you love, what are you good at, which can be different than actually what you love. Like I would love to write a fiction novel. I don't think I'm particularly good at it. I am really good at writing like how-to business nonfiction stuff, right? What can you get paid for? Writing does not pay well. Consulting pays well. And if you have a book, then you're a better consultant. So I figured out how to make a living while doing what I wanted, like that didn't actually pay, but led to the revenue that would like allow me to have time for what I loved. And then also like, what does the world actually need? Right? If like thinking about yourself as part of the system and having both the confidence to contribute your strengths and the humility to ask, what do people need and what will the market pay for, will allow you to come upon at least a compromise that will allow you to sustain yourself while like the system starts to change, right? It's not going to be a perfect solution. The systems of oppression are interlocking and we are all forced to make impossible decisions in our life. And so you have to forgive yourself for not having the perfect solution, for not living up to whatever self-help book says that you should have, like, not even something like The Secret, that you haven't manifested like the perfect, like that's nonsense, particularly if you have a disability in this country, right? That we are forced to compromise when living under systems of oppression, but that does not mean that we are forced to allow our light to go out, right? And so you're gonna have to get really creative. And there are options. I've heard that there are now companies that particularly staff people with autism for jobs that play to their strengths. There are these resources out there. But I also want to give you that, like, you can decide to not listen to things in order to find an environment that values what you have.
This is Lindsey. I think one of the main, like perfectionism that Joshua named earlier, a huge, aspect of our dominant cultural norms. Another one is that individualism, which makes you potentially, Maya, or I will speak for myself, sometimes feel like I've got to figure it out by myself. And there's a problem if I can't figure that out by myself, what to do next. And like we said in December, we want to counter that. You don't have to figure this out by yourself. The beauty of being in this community here is that there are so many leaders here who are like, drop your name and your email right now and we'll reach out, right? Like, you know, our great producer, Laura Kay, called me Monday night, and I was picking up the kids from tutoring, and she doesn't normally call me in the end of the day. And I said, uh-oh, is this good news or bad news? Remember this, Laura Kay? And interestingly, I was thinking later that you weren't sure and didn't say it's good news, which was, I think, interesting. But Laura said, hey, I just found out that, and as always, I've asked for Laura's permission to share this. Laura said, I've just found out that I am on the spectrum and have ADHD. And I said, Laura, this would be like me calling you today and saying, I just discovered I'm Black, right? Like, I've known this person for many years, although Laura may just now be coming into that awareness. Having worked with diverse people for many years, there were many traits of my dear friend who were either indicative of diagnoses or lifestyles like this, or ways that her beautiful brain works, or just unique aspects of Laura's personality. But the point being that I see a trend that there are more leaders like me who are doing the work to figure out, how do I best leverage the tools of my diverse team? What are some of the things that, even if I don't have a diagnosis, I can say, hey, there are some similarities here to some of the similarities of people who have come to me with this diagnosis before, and I'm going to see if this helps support our work environment, our work relationship, the way that I manage you, the way that I support you. And what is most exciting is that it seems to be, correct me if I'm wrong, Laura Kay, extremely liberating for Laura to have this language, right? And similarly, as a Black female in this world, as you know, more and more language has been out there of other Black women talking about their experience moving through the world, it's liberating to no longer think it's just me experiencing that. And so I think there's both the very real possibility here that, and I'm just looking at based on what I'm seeing, Mia, so I want you to please call me in, that the intersection of disability as well as being BIPOC, right? It was perfectly okay for chairs to be thrown across the room by that ASD leader, right? Everybody knows who I'm talking about at Microsoft, right? Bill Gates is also on the spectrum, but doesn't seem to be hampering that ability to be a CEO. And so the intersection of who's allowed to get away with certain behaviors versus who that becomes a problem with is also potentially at play here. And so the main thing I want you to walk away with is that whether it's on a call with Minal or Jess or Joshua, there are many tools available. Kim American is in the room here. Joy is in the room here, who are also activists in this space. And just reach out and let's have some time together, because you don't have to do oppression alone. Oh, Joshua.
I was gonna say, this is Josh. And one thing I just want to add, just anecdotally. So as my profile states, I'm a late in life diagnosed ADHDer, right? I have CPTSD and a bunch of other stuff that only I was able to come to terms with through mass health, right? So through government provided healthcare, I was finally given a therapist at 32, right? So I have noticed in doing this work, specifically a lot within those racialized and whiteness, there's a lot of late in life diagnosis that are coming to people, and those are the people that are noticing the matrix, so to speak, right? You've experienced some oppression within the capitalist dichotomy, because maybe like me, you were a rock star and you ramped up in your sales job and you were killing it, but then you like started to question things in the wrong person, and then you questioned a manager and got yelled at, and then you got fired for not being a culture fit, right? there's all of that is starting to like peel back the layers on an oppressive system. And just to be clear, every other person on this panel lives that daily, right? So, you know, recognize the privilege in A, that like it's taken us this long to like wake up to that. But B, also know that like there's a large community of us out there. You're not alone, right? And for those not racialized towards whiteness, and Maya and I have spoken. Maya, I'm so happy you decided to come. There's a lot of things that exist out there within capitalism that condition you to associate your value with your extractive capitalistic value.
Ooh.
And I need people to understand that like you're more than that, right? You're a human being. You're functioning in this oppressive system to survive. But that does not mean just because you can't commodify yourself in certain ways that you don't deserve to exist here.
Yes. Damn. Need that church organ again. This is Lindsey. Izzy, you had a question.
Yes, I did. This is Izzy. Thank you so much. I guess first, because we are talking about jobs and being valued, I did want to share a resource before I ask my question. I found recently a job site that seems to have a crew behind it, in which it's called mentra.me, so I can put that in the chat in a minute. But it is specific for helping folks with cognitive disability and like the range of mental physical capabilities, and it goes through step by step of like, what are you good at, what are your strengths, what doesn't work for you in a workplace, and then it asks at the end, it's like, okay, so these are the jobs. You click on literally one button because they already have all of your information to say, I'm interested in this position. And if you're shortlisted, that company contacts you. So just because I know it is hard to find companies and kind of like vet them on your own to say, is this company actually going to be a fit or not? Something I've felt very intensely in my job search, mainly because I have a history, probably it sounds very similar to Joshua, that like I in a way that I am not ashamed of, I was nearly written up for insubordination before I quit in a particular job. And so it is just one of those things that I know can be a challenge. So actually also something I saw the other day on LinkedIn, messaged Joshua about, and I would be really curious to kind of dig a little deeper into it, because I believe that like I was very much on the same page of like, sometimes you need to know when you vet yourself. So in the actually related to the time that I was written up for insubordination, I was in a position of privilege that I could just quit and say, this is not a good fit, and like I can literally go do this on my own. That is not the case a lot of the times in corporate situations, and particularly is not a case for marginalized communities, including like, it's, to be honest, it's just not the case for a lot of Americans as well, but particularly the BIPOC community and folks, Black folks. And so there was somebody posted something that said, that just like made me so angry. And I was like, if I was in that room, I would interrupt it. But I know that like my gut instinct of interruption would not be polite. And the thing is like, I did take some time and I stepped back and I was like, if I was actually in that room, like this is more like what I would say, that I would interrupt it. But like my number one concern is like, because of white fragility, am I risking someone else getting fired? And so that is something that I think about a lot, of like, how can I do interruption instead of maybe doing what I would do normally of default of like, oh, I've witnessed that, I'm going to go check in with that person, I'm going to offer them as much help as I can to like get out of this situation. But like, what about interrupting in that moment? And like, when is interrupting always the desired goal, I guess. Even though like, yes, I think white supremacy and racism should always be interrupted, it should be interrupted to not stop someone's ability to keep moving forward and cause harm.
This is just to provide some context. So the post they're referring to, a Black author was in a C-suite with 6 other white men, and they referred to her in a nut dog whistle, a full-blown racialized term. And so Izzy reached out to me trying to understand where the dichotomy might exist, where like if they were in that room and they spoke up in that moment, their concern was they're still protected by whiteness. And what if their action causes more harm to the person outside of this overt racist act, right? And so, I think that's an extremely nuanced conversation as far as, and I'll stop it there. I think that sums it up.
Mrs. Lindsey, that's a great question, Izzy. And that type of nuance happens a lot in organizations. So we'll pick this apart a little bit. Minal, do you want to start?
This is Minal. I would just say that in order to be successful at those interruptions, and I don't think I am yet either, you need to role play that. That's like an actual skill. You need to like role play with friends on like how to do that and have that in your back pocket before the event happens. Your amygdala is not going to let you strategize how to address this issue in the moment. So you shouldn't have that expectation of you. Even in the civil rights movement, nonviolent protests, like they were trained. Like it was rigorous training to know how to respond nonviolently to acts of aggression and white supremacy. So don't there's this beautiful analogy I heard of like, people want to change the world, but it's like they want to perform surgery without going to medical school. Like you got to go to medical school, like if you want to do that level of work, right? Otherwise, you're just like a person with good intentions and a scalpel who's going to do a lot of harm. So put in that work to do that stuff, and then and to that point, like the research shows that white people are most likely to listen to other white people when it comes to racism and white supremacy. So I don't know if you have to interrupt in that moment. If you don't have that skill set, like strike when the iron is cold, not hot, and have a private conversation later, right? After you also check in with your colleague and see if they want that or not, like those sorts of things. So I would just, again, like we can't be all solutions to all problems. And if we don't have the training, then we're going to do a disservice to the intent.
One of the things I would encourage you to go back and watch the episode where teacher, priestess, Leticia Nieto was on. Really great, talking about disrupting aggression in the moment. Laura, can you remember what that episode was called?
Unlearning colonialism.
No, Unlearning cancel culture, was it?
Oh yeah, I was just looking at somebody else's message. Yeah, cancel culture, I can put that in.
Thank you. Some really great tools there to start working through, as Minal is naming. One thing in general, and it's a part of our community guidelines there as well, is we really try to train people on the difference between calling out versus calling in. And in calling out, it often is about, I want to be seen as the rescuer or the savior here, or I'm trying to bolster my sense of self by separating myself from you. I'm the good person and you're the bad person. And so I'm going to call you out so that everybody is aware of that. When we're calling in somebody, we, one, maintain their humanity stays intact. And two, we see our own potential to make that same mistake. May not be around racialized topics, but remember that in the rainbow of different types of oppression, different isms, we may be far forward on our work of anti-racism, but very much at the beginning of our work on anti-Semitism, on disability justice, on anti-homophobia, anti-transphobia, right? We're all moving like an abacus for, is this going to be ageist for me to say? So an abacus, millennials, is like before a calculator that was on your phone, and you like slid the things forward. That's just how old I am. So by reminding yourself that you make that same mistake in some capacity all the time, how would you like to be called into a better relationship with your values? That's how I often train people to approach it. If you made this mistake in a different ism, in a different type of oppression category, how would you want to be invited back in? And that can often, one, it takes time because you've got to think about it. And so that allows for that pause. Two, then we start to think about how do we train teams to do that in a faster and faster way together, where calling in is a part of their working norms. But one of the best quotes I ever heard, and forgive me, I can't think of the author, but she said, be thankful for the, as she was talking about as it pertains to whiteness, be thankful for the Black person that taught you how to be an ally. Right? Because somebody did that work to introduce it to you, Izzy, right? And that person was very patient. And so as you go into your own community to do the work, be as patient as that person was with you. Is any of that useful at all?
Yes, that is. This is Izzy. That everything that you have shared has been incredibly helpful. Thank you, Lindsey. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Manal. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jess. Dear community, thank you for this time together. Thank you for this space. Thank you for unlearning together. And let's plan to report back January 2024 on what business we did unusually. Does it sound like a good plan? All righty. Happy Wednesday, everyone.